What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Fireside Rangers. I'm your host, Anthony Rivardo, joined by my co-hosts, Eric Wilson and Collin Alcabes. And today, let's go ahead and discuss the goalie situation for the New York Rangers because we got a great goaltender in Igor Shesterkin, but behind him, a massive question mark. So far through this preseason, Jonathan Quick has not looked good. At the time that we're recording this, there is one preseason game left to play, will be played tonight. We'll see how Quick plays in that one. And Dylan Garand was sent back down to the AHL, which is a little bit of a questionable decision considering the performance of Quick versus the performance of Garand through this preseason. We're going to go ahead and discuss the backup goaltender position for the New York Rangers and kind of talk about how Garand could maybe steal some playing time during the regular season if Jonathan Quick continues to struggle. Before we dive into all that, make sure to leave a like if you do enjoy this episode. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. Ring the bell so you don't miss an episode, and comment your thoughts on the topic down below in the comment section. And make sure to go ahead and follow us on all of our social media channels at Fireside Rangers. We're pumping out a lot of new content there. We've kind of rebranded, reimagined the Fireside Rangers landscape. So go ahead and follow Instagram, Twitter at Fireside Rangers, and check out all the elite content we're going to be posting there. But without further ado, Eric, how are you doing today, my friend? And what are your thoughts on Jonathan Quick and the way that he's played in this preseason?
I'm doing pretty good. Something's going on with my camera, but we'll just keep pushing out content no matter what, because hockey season is almost upon us, 1 week from opening night, and I couldn't be more excited. As for the goaltending situation, I could be a little more excited about that. Igor Shesterkin, top 2 goalie in the league, if not number 1, in my opinion he is, but there's a little bit of a backup problem where Quick was kind of brought in to be just like a solid backup behind Shesterkin, just win a couple games when Igor needs to rest. But from what we've seen so far, I'm not really sure he's capable of that. And, Dylan Garand, he's a young prospect. Is he ready to be called up if Quick continues to disappoint? That's the question. But we'll get into that in a couple of minutes.
That we will. But Collin, how are you doing, and what are your thoughts on the Rangers' backup goaltender situation?
I'm good. I'm a little wary when it comes to Quick. I think that when you see a goalie, he's averaging like 5 goals against in the preseason, but it's the preseason, you know what I mean? Everybody has their struggles, and I think if we remember back to last season, Halak struggled in the beginning of the regular season and ended up putting together a pretty nice season, in my opinion, stealing us some games down the line. And he's also not playing with all of the starting defense. So there's some things there. I thought he looked pretty solid last night after that first goal. But the defense wasn't really giving him a lot to work with. But as for Garand, I'm excited about him, and we'll talk a little bit more as the episode goes on about what we want for him.
Yeah, we'll talk about Jonathan Quick first and foremost, the veteran goalie. 37 years old, signed on a 1-year deal, supposed to be the replacement for Yaroslav Halak, who you mentioned, Collin. And this is not a guy that we want to start a whole bunch of games, but when he does start games, we want him to be reliable. So far through the preseason, he has not been reliable. Through 3 games, they've lost all 3 of his starts in the preseason, .807 save percentage. And that is really bad in comparison to what Dylan Garand posted in the preseason as well. So Jonathan Quick on this 1-year deal. Eric, how are you feeling? Do you think that he's a player that we can rely on? Do you think these are just preseason jitters and he's just getting into regular season form? Or are you legitimately concerned about his ability to start in the regular season?
I think there's a little bit of a mixture of opinions when it comes to Quick so far, because yes, I am concerned, on a scale of like 1 to 10, I'm probably sitting at like a 6 or a 7 maybe, which is pretty high just based on his like individual performances so far. But as Collin already mentioned, there are a lot of outside factors that are definitely contributing. Quick is joining a new team, which he's been moved around a lot over the last year. He had a couple of injuries last season as well that I'm sure he's going to take a little bit of time to really just come back from. It is the preseason. The Rangers are playing with a defense that isn't at full NHL capacity just yet. So there's so many outside contributing factors where my 6 or a 7 panic level about Quick could easily be reverted down to like a 2 or a 3 as soon as we see like a real NHL level game.
Yeah, and speaking of disappointment level, Collin, I'm curious to hear your disappointment level on Jonathan Quick and whether or not you're confident that he can turn it around once the regular season begins.
I'm disappointed so far for sure, but I think given more time with the Rangers, figuring out their system and how the forwards and the defense are going to play in Laviolette's new system, and with the new assistant coaches and what they're planning on doing, and a little bit more time from the best goalie coach in the world, Benny Allaire, I think that he'll be able to put it together down the line. But there's definitely cause for concern in the early parts of the season while he's still getting his footing under him in New York.
Yeah, and Talking about playing in New York in the Metropolitan Division, Eric, when we're looking at backup goaltending for the New York Rangers, we can always rely on Igor Shesterkin. He'll steal you games. We know that, like you said, arguably the best goalie in the NHL. So when you're looking at that, you can rely on him. But how crucial is it to have a solid backup goaltender playing in this competitive Metro Division? Because we saw games last season where, Igor Shesterkin wasn't ready to go, needed a little bit of rest. Rangers dropped some games early on in the regular season. We got into a close race in seeding at the end of the year, and you look back on the beginning of the year, maybe had Igor played or had Yaroslav Halak played a little bit better, the Rangers could have fought for a higher seed, had a more favorable matchup in the postseason, but instead that wasn't the case. So why is it so important in your eyes for Jonathan Quick or whoever the backup goalie ends up being during the regular season to really play at full strength and help the Rangers continue to compete in the Metro?
I think it's extremely important, especially when you just look at the recurring issues the Rangers have faced throughout the recent years where, yes, is Igor able to steal us games and get us wins that we probably shouldn't have deserved? Yes, but it's like we don't really want him to be doing that every single game, as good as he is, Igor does need to rest. And we've seen so many times recently where by the time the playoffs roll around, Igor is drained after a 60-plus game season where he really should be only playing 50 to 55 starts right then and there. So to have a guy who you can reliably call in when you're playing against teams that are closer to the bottom of the league to get you a win is extremely important, because you don't want Igor to be playing those games, wasting his energy just for a couple wins, especially in the Metropolitan Division where it's so highly competitive that 1 or 2 wins could separate you from a divisional playoff spot and being out of the wild card.
Yeah, totally. And Collin, what is your take on that, in terms of the importance of having a backup goaltender, and how much of an impact you think it could make on the postseason race once we get into the thick of the regular season?
I think Eric put it best. I think he's entirely right in the fact that Igor playing a majority of the games obviously is what comes with a starter, but playing close to 60 games, it takes a toll. I mean, it takes a toll mentally. He struggled last season with a little bit of a mental block for a bit, and he had played some of his worst hockey, which in most goalies' careers is some of their best hockey. But for Shesterkin, it was definitely out of character, and it was noticeable. And so we were happy he was able to get it back together, but hopefully with a little bit fewer games played, you also limit the risk of injury. So that's another thing to look out for. But you don't want him fried going into the playoffs, and that was it seemed to be the case a little bit. Even though he was still phenomenal against the Devils, you could tell that he was definitely gassed. And towards the end of the Tampa run too, you could tell that he was beat.
Yeah, I was just about to add that. I think even going to that Eastern Conference Finals against the Lightning, Igor Shesterkin, the Rangers just keep putting him in this position where they get so deep in the postseason, and they've played him so much throughout the regular season that he's just not the same player. Like, he's still an elite world-class player, but he's just not who he was during the prime of the regular season, and that's something that the Rangers need to avoid. I think that they need to rely on their backup goalie more. They need a backup goaltender to go out there and actually play some solid games to take some relief off Igor Shesterkin. But now it looks like we're heading into another season where we might have a lot of inconsistency at that backup spot. And that does create a little bit of caution for me, and a little bit of hesitation going into this regular season on how many wins the Rangers can realistically pick up, and knowing that they might not have a reliable guy in net when Igor Shesterkin isn't ready to play. It might cause them to rely on Igor Shesterkin too much, cause his performance to falter, especially towards the end of the regular season. And so I think that this could become a pretty drastic problem that the Rangers are facing if Jonathan Quick doesn't turn it around. So, Eric, I want to ask you, how early in the regular season does Jonathan Quick need to turn it around for you to start feeling better? How short is this guy's leash before you think Peter Laviolette says, okay, Quick, we gave it a try on the 1-year deal. Thank you for your attempt here, but you're costing us games. You're becoming a problem. We got to go with a different guy. And then they call up Dylan Garand. How short is the leash in your opinion?
I don't know if I would look at it as a time standpoint, or I wouldn't say just early November or something. I would just say depending on the amount of games he's appeared in, because who knows how often Laviolette's going to put Quick in the net at this point. But I would say 10 starts. Because we got a little bit of a sample size here throughout preseason, but with all of those outside determining factors, you can't make a final judgment yet. And you also don't want to just take such a small amount of games and make a huge decision like calling Garand up possibly after just a couple of bad games. Like we've mentioned at the very beginning of this episode, last season, Halak had a really terrible start, And then by the end of the season, he was just right where we needed him to be. So I still have hope that Quick could turn things around. I would give him 10 starts, which, if you assume he plays 25, 30 games, maybe like a third of the season.
Yeah, and Collin, how are you feeling in terms of giving Jonathan Quick a short leash towards the beginning of the regular season?
It's tough only because, you bring him in, he's a homegrown guy. He's obviously he's a little bit more expensive, and it'd be tough to eat that cap and for Droid to just kind of have to deal with that. I also think that he's obviously not the player that he was when he was winning cups and things like that, and that's to be noted. But you have to look at also how Laviolette used two goalies last year. I mean, he was using Kemper, but he also used Charlie Lindgren a ton. So if he's using Quick a lot and we're seeing a lot of Quick and we're not getting the results that are needed, then I'm willing to pull the plug pretty early. But you have to look at the goals and how they're scored. And if the defense is leaving them out to dry, which the Rangers defense typically doesn't when the backups come in, they typically play a little bit better than they do in front of Shesterkin, at least I feel. But it depends on the types of and the quality of goals that are getting scored against him. If he's letting in muffins across the board and can't stop a beach ball, yeah, get him out and try something different, whether that's Louis Domingue, whether that's Dylan Garand, whatever it takes. But if he's making, some pretty crazy saves and he's still getting beat and losing games because we're either failing to put up goals or failing to help him in the D zone, then I give him a little bit longer of a leash. But I think that's fair enough in the coaching's eyes, at least.
Yeah, and before we dive into Dylan Garand, I want to wrap up on Jonathan Quick by just discussing his preseason in particular, because you kind of mentioned there, is he letting in goals that he should be saving, or is he letting in goals that, are just difficult, good shots, whatever, right? Because, for example, there was one goal that he let in the last preseason game. He was completely screened. Eric Gustafsson didn't get out of the way. Like, you could blame that one on Gustafsson rather than blame that on Jonathan Quick. So I want to know your guys' opinion. We'll start with you, Eric. What do you make of this preseason from Jonathan Quick? Do you think that he was this complete disaster that some fans are kind of describing him as being? Or do you think that it was just a little bit inconsistent, mostly good? What is your overall take on his preseason performance?
Yeah, I mean, you're right, where there have been some goals that weren't his fault. In the same game as the play that you mentioned, Jacob Trouba kind of just flattened a Devils player into Quick, knocked him out of the net. Then Jacob Trouba himself went in the net, and then the Devils scored. Like, you can't blame Quick for that. And a couple other same situations where it's not his fault. But I think overall as a whole, just through everything that we've seen, I think the fans' opinions are justified. It was a pretty disastrous preseason from Quick so far.
Yeah, and Collin, what is your take on it? Disastrous or not as bad as people are making it sound?
I think it's a little bit of an overreaction. I think it's, if you look at the guys who are scoring, at least in the last Devils game, it's Hughes, it's Brad, it's their stars and their starters. I mean, he shot an empty netter, so I'm not going to count that one. But like, a lot of the people who are scoring are NHL regulars, and they're scoring on our AHL defense, which they should be doing. And they're not just AHL regular or NHL regulars; they're superstars. Jack Hughes had 99 points last year. Jesper Bratt is in the second year of a big breakout. Like, these are legit players. And if you look at even the Islanders game, JG Pageau, he's a consistent NHLer. And while it's a bit concerning that these consistent NHLers are scoring on him, and that's the level that we're going to need him to play at, he's also going to have consistent NHL caliber defense in front of him. And I think it makes all the difference, other than Jacob Trouba sliding into the net, that you can expect from Trouba year round.
Yes, good point. But now's a good time to transition over and talk about Dylan Garand. As you mentioned earlier, Eric, he was sent back down to the Hartford Wolfpack today. He was sent down a few days ago. He was recalled back up to play with the Rangers and then just sent right back down, which is a little bit interesting roster management there from Chris Drury and Peter Laviolette. But I think it's okay. They wanted to get him a little bit more playing time, and I think they made the right call, getting him a little bit more go with the NHL team. But now he's back down in Hartford, and it's kind of questionable whether or not the Rangers will call him up again at any point during the regular season. Really, that's dependent on how well Jonathan Quick plays and how healthy Igor Shesterkin stays. But what did you think of Dylan Garand's preseason performance, Eric? How do you feel about him? Do you think that he is somebody that could be ready to go in the regular season, or do you think he's still a young guy that needs more development before he plays in the NHL?
I think Garand had a very well preseason. He looked pretty amazing out there. He finished with a .947 save percentage, which is like incredibly high for NHL standards. But then at the same time, You also have to factor in what Collin mentioned, where most of Garand's starts were at the very beginning of preseason, where it was mainly just all prospects in the AHL that he's facing off against. If he played last night against New Jersey, you might have seen that save percentage stat go down a little bit right there. And I think in the next couple of years, Garand is going to become a very strong backup goalie behind Igor, which that itself will help boost him as well. But he is still young. I'm pretty sure he's 21 years old right now. Igor didn't even enter the league till he was like 26. So a guy like Garand, it's like, could we potentially see him a little bit this season? I would say maybe. No one knows what's going to happen with injuries or anything, but I think Jonathan Quick was a very low risk, high reward contract signing, under $1 million for 1 year. And I think we should really just give him the benefit of the doubt right now, let him play for a little bit. But he's only signed for 1 year. Who knows what's going to happen next year? Garand could be a backup starter next season, but I think for now it might just be best to keep him down there and let Quick do his thing.
Yeah, Colin, sounds like you're a little bit more pessimistic on your outlook for Jonathan Quick compared to Eric. Eric seems a little bit more confident in him than you are. So how are you leaning on this kind of debacle here where Dylan Garand, do you think that he is ready? Do you think that he could overtake Jonathan Quick if he struggles? Or do you think it's like you got to ride it out with Jonathan Quick because he's the veteran and he knows what he's doing?
Unfortunately, I'm not entirely pessimistic on Quick, but I'm not extremely excited from what I've seen so far. Do I think he'll turn it around? Yes. But do I think Garand will be the answer to our problems at backup? No. Garand is young. I mean, Eric said it before. He's extremely young, and developing prospects is a lot about confidence. And if you bring him up too early and he gets shelled in his first start, that could do disastrous things to his development as a whole. And I get goalies are like it can happen. It's not unheard of. And even in the AHL can happen. But I think allowing him to develop his confidence down in the AHL for another season will be extremely beneficial for him. I said this the other day when I was talking about Kako and Lafreniere. I wish they got a little bit of time down in the AHL to boost their confidence. And who knows? I mean, maybe that's why they struggled up into this point. And it's not like a foolproof thing, but I think a lot of it is going to be up to what Benny Allaire thinks. And I think they take what he says as God's word. He has coached up so many good goalies in his day. So whatever he says, in my opinion, goes. If he thinks Garand is the answer, then so be it. If he thinks that the Garand needs to stay in the AHL, which is what I predict is what he said, and the reason him being sent down today, I think that's what will happen, and that's what will stick. But Benny's got his finger on the pulse, and he'll pull him up when he's ready. But I think he knows what he has with Quick, and I think he knows he can make it work.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to make there. I mean, coaching is paramount when you're developing these prospects. In any sport, at any position, coaching is paramount. You got to get the right guys to coach and develop your talents. But one other talent that I do want to briefly mention before we close here is Louis Domingue. He was sent back down to the Wolf Pack a few days ago. I want to get your guys' take on him and your outlook on him as he goes back to the Wolf Pack to play this season and potentially looking even further down the road if he could be elevated into the NHL and play for the Rangers. Eric, what are your thoughts on Louis Domingue?
If you thought I was pessimistic about Quick or Collin, this is going to be some pretty pessimistic info right here. I don't like Louis Domingue. He's old. He's at the end of his career. He's had time in the NHL. He hasn't really been very good. And I think the Rangers really just signed him for depth purposes. He's an AHL starter at best, probably not even anymore. And I think the Rangers would really only rely on him if there was like a slew of injuries that forced us to call him up. But I would choose Quick or Garand over him any day. I don't know why I hate him so much. I just do.
Collin, how do you feel about Louis Domingue?
I'm going to have to disagree with Eric here. I think if you look at Louis Domingue, he has that NHL level talent. He's played there before. Am I saying he's a stud or a star? No, he's serviceable and serviceable at best. But if you look, he got Pittsburgh to Game 7 against a really good Rangers team that went to the conference finals a couple of years ago, and then they pulled him, and Jar ended up losing the whole thing. I think if you could put a good enough team in front of him, I think he's serviceable enough to steal you a couple of games. Do I exactly want him up? No. But I think that he would be a better option over Garand at this point in time.
So that's the question that I was going to ask you. I was going to say, Jonathan Quick struggles. Would you rather call up Domingue or Garand? So you're going with Domingue, but Eric, I assume that you'd be going with Garand?
I don't even know, to be honest with you, because I think both options would be very high risk, where like Domingue could just come in and really just play horribly. But then at the same time, like Garand has this really high potential. And if we do call him up too early and ruin that confidence, like Collin said, that could not only be detrimental to this Rangers season, but like Garand's entire development and career. So just maybe based on that, just the amount of risk, I would say Domingue at first, but then I'd give him like 20 minutes of ice time before I send him back down.
Yeah, I could agree with that take as well. I'm pretty confident in Garand. I like what he showed in the preseason. I do think that, a little bit more development in the AHL, let him continue to build that confidence. If Jonathan Quick does struggle, I would go ahead and call up Garand personally. But hopefully it doesn't get to that point. I'm hoping that this is just preseason jitters. Jonathan Quick's just trying to get himself back and ready for the regular season. You'd rather him make the mistakes now than make them during the regular season. So hopefully we get into the regular season and he looks like exactly what the Rangers expected him to be when they signed him. But if not, they do have some options here. As we mentioned, Dylan Garand, Louis Domingue. We could see if they do have any other options as well. But I think that those two options are pretty strong for the Rangers if they do need somebody else to back up Igor Shesterkin. But Eric, looks like you might have some closing thoughts before we wrap here. What's up?
I think just one important thing that we failed to acknowledge yet is with Quick's like veteran status and stuff. If we were to try to send him down to the AHL, I think it is possible that another team could just claim him off of waivers. So it's like if we try to send him down, we could just be losing him entirely. And I think there are a lot of NHL teams out there who, despite, maybe not being the best, could really find a way to utilize Quick. So you also have to factor in that risk when you think about making a swap.
It's a good point. It's definitely something that the Rangers will keep in mind if they decide to get rid of Quick at any point during the regular season, or at least give him some sort of a break. But Collin, any closing thoughts before we wrap this one up on this goalie situation?
I mean, at the end of the day, I'm hoping that they all succeed in all levels of their playing. I liked Quick. I hated to say it when he was on the Kings. It was miserable playing against him. I just could not stand him. But now that he's a Ranger, I'm excited. I'm excited to see what he could do in terms of mentorship for Shesterkin and what he can do for this team. I think that he's still got a little bit of gas left in the tank, and I think he's hoping he can add one more ring to that hand, this time with the Rangers insignia on it.
Yeah, I would certainly hope that that's the outcome here, as we're all hoping for that. And of course, we'll continue to update you all on this backup goaltender situation and everything else regarding the New York Rangers right here on Fireside Rangers. So make sure to leave a like if you did enjoy this episode. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. Ring the bell so you don't miss an episode, and comment your thoughts on the topic down below in the comment section. And make sure to go ahead and follow us on all of our social media channels at Fireside Rangers. Again, brand new content, new graphics. It's all new and it's looking good. So don't miss out on the great content that we're going to be posting. Go ahead and follow us at Fireside Rangers. But without further ado, we will catch you all in the next one. Have a good one, and
let's go Rangers.